I would argue that we've been in a constitutional crisis for quite some time now, but if you're more like Chuck Schumer and didn't necessarily think we were there yet, well, now even that standard has been crossed because the Trump administration is not even trying to return Kilmar Abrego Gracia to the United States, even though the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that they needed to facilitate his return. And during a recent White House meeting with Bukele, it just became very abundantly clear to me that these are just a couple of authoritarians who are now playing games with the man's life as he rots in a gulag in El Salvador. So let's go ahead and take a look at this meeting at the White House. And I want to show you this first clip, and I know it's a little bit choppy. I know it's a little bit hard to hear, but I definitely think it's important for everybody to hear what they're saying here. If you guys do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe.
The mandate the people wanted to change everything, and they want it. He demanded they love you. They love what you. Well, you know, I'm not feel important. I want him to do, for homegrown criminals next. Yeah. I said, homegrowns are next. The homegrown's built. You got to build about 5 more places. Yeah, that's fair. All right. It's not big enough. No.
So for those of you that didn't hear it, that's Donald Trump saying the homegrowns are next. The American citizens are next. And in fact, you're going to need to build 5 more facilities because we're going to be sending so many people at you, you're not even going to have room. And they're sitting there joking about it. I mean, this should be concerning to each and every American, because what has Donald Trump shown us so far? It's that he's willing to strip due process rights away, which means even if you are an American citizen, you would have no process to contest that you shouldn't be deported. This is a huge, huge deal. Donald Trump is not joking here. We are going to see American citizens sent to the gulag in El Salvador, and Bukele, the fascist leader from El Salvador, is playing his game. And when Donald Trump is asked about Kilmar Abrego Gracia, this is what he had to say.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, 2 courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
Now, Pam Bondi is just full of shit here. There is no court in this country that determined Kilmar Abrego Gracia was gang affiliated. She is lying to you. Kilmar Abrego Gracia came to this country fleeing gang violence in El Salvador. And when he was seen by an immigration judge in 2019, when Donald Trump was president the first time, that judge determined that he deserved protective status in our country, because if he were returned to El Salvador, he would likely be subjected to gang violence. So not only was he not here illegally, he had legal protected status. So the Trump administration is just lying about all of it. That is why, and the crazy part is they even went into court and admitted that they made a mistake, but they're doubling down on, oh, well, he's a violent criminal and we just didn't do the right paperwork and yada, yada, yada. They are full of shit. This is an innocent family man who has been kidnapped and sent to a gulag in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court said, you need to facilitate his return. And instead, they are playing games like this. Donald Trump should be impeached. Each and every one of these people who are involved in the disappearance of innocent people should be impeached. No question about it. And then when Bukele is asked about whether he would work with Trump to return Kilmar Abrego Gracia, this is what he had to say.
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to have suggested that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's only
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you could release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
They'd love to have a criminal, released into
there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people.
The only sick people is the Trump administration and Bukele. He's trying to say, oh, we're not going to release terrorists. How am I going to smuggle them back into the United States? How am I going to do that, bro? What? This is sick. This is another fascist authoritarian leader who is abusing emergency powers just like Donald Trump is here. And now they're in cahoots together playing this sort of game as they have an innocent man locked up in an El Salvadorian prison. This is not normal. This should not be acceptable in the United States. He's not a terrorist. He is not gang affiliated. He is not a criminal. What are we doing here? Again, this should be concerning to each and every American, because when you strip due process rights away, that means that they could send anybody to the gulag, and there's no recourse. That's why it was such a huge win when the Supreme Court stepped in and said unanimously that they needed to facilitate their return. Because this is not what we're supposed to be doing here in the United States. But Trump doesn't care about any of it. He doesn't want anything to get in the way of what he wants to do, and he wants no accountability. And now we have innocent people being sent to a torturous prison in El Salvador. And then Marco Rubio pipes up and says, well, I don't know what the big deal is here, guys. The courts can't do what they're trying to do.
These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about it?
Yeah, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Do you see what he's trying to do there? They're trying to 1984 us. Coming out and saying, oh, it was actually the Trump administration. They actually won in the Supreme Court by a 9-0 decision. We won. When that is exactly the opposite of what happened. And to think that returning a man from an El Salvadoran prison is somehow foreign policy is just ludicrous. Marco Rubio is full of shit. Stephen Miller is full of shit. They keep on trying to brand him as a criminal or a violent criminal gang member when they have not been able to provide any evidence that that is actually the case. That is why the Supreme Court said you need to facilitate his return. So do not let them pull the wool over your eyes. Do not let them 1984 you. Up is down and down is up. That is not what is going on here. Kilmar Abrego Gracia is a family man from Maryland who was kidnapped and disappeared from our country by this administration. Here's Trump ignoring a question from Caitlin Collins.
You said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump.
You're not returning violent criminals. That's why this is a problem. You stripped due process rights away. His case got drawn to public attention, and then we learned that he was in this country legally with protective status, which means he shouldn't have been deported in the first place. He shouldn't have been rounded up in the first place. And if the Trump administration had the evidence to prove that he was some MS-13 gang member, why aren't they providing it? Ask yourself that question. If it was so easy to prove that this is some violent criminal who is wreaking havoc on the streets of America, why can't they prove it? Why are they trying to play games with the court? Why are they doing this nonsense, word trickery? I mean, they cannot prove it because it doesn't exist. This whole flimsy idea that he was an MS-13 gang member came from some unreliable source back in 2019. And even when the judge looked at the police looked at the evidence, they said, well, we don't think that dude's telling the truth. I don't think he's in a gang. So they just do not know what they're talking about. If they want to bring him back to the country and bring him through the due process that he deserves, and they can prove that he is a violent criminal that needs to be deported, then do it. Why aren't they doing it? It's because they know they messed up here, and they know that they're not going to be able to prove what they have been claiming. And like I said, everybody needs to be concerned by this, because when you strip due process rights away and nobody is given any recourse, if the government is just allowed to go around and accuse you of being bad, accuse you of doing this crime or that crime, accusing you of being in a gang, and then you don't have any legal recourse to prove otherwise, then the American people will start getting rounded up. That's how this stuff always starts. It starts with the out group, then they move in. And Donald Trump was even opining about this very issue at this meeting.
Are you willing to pay for those facilities to be opened if new ones were going to be built?
I'd do something. We'd help them out. Yeah, we help them. They're great facilities, very strong facilities, and they don't play games. I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that, Steve, okay?
So that's Donald Trump talking about rounding up American citizens and deporting them to El Salvador. You know, Donald Trump once said that if the Supreme Court determined that he needed to bring somebody back due to a mistake or otherwise, that he would facilitate that he would do that. But now the scenario has come where an innocent man has been deported with no due process at all, and the Supreme Court stepped up and said you must facilitate his return, and now you have a Trump administration who is blatantly ignoring those orders. These people need to be removed from office. These people are terrible human beings. If they had the evidence that this guy was in a gang, if they had the evidence that he was some violent criminal, then they need to prove it in a court. It is not acceptable in the United States for the government to just go around and start accusing people of crimes, and then when they're asked for evidence, they say, state secrets, foreign policy, we can't show you that actually. That is not how the system is supposed to work. And every single American should stand up and push back against this. Because like I said before, it starts with the out group, and then they move in. And mark my words, if there is not sufficient pushback against this, even if there is sufficient pushback against this, it seems very likely that Donald Trump is going to try to deport American citizens, even though all established rule of law in this country would say that that is not allowed. But Donald Trump and his authoritarian friends, his fascistic friends down in El Salvador, are now playing this little game and rounding up innocent people and locking them up in a gulag. This is unacceptable. It is un-American, and we should stand up and fight every single way against this. This is not how things are supposed to be in America, folks. So, We're going to be following it closely, but I will leave it there for now. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. We're trying to build something here on the left that adequately pushes back against this right-wing media ecosystem that just shovels shit for Donald Trump and his authoritarian ways every single day. So if you do like what I do here, please do remember to smash that subscribe button. It is free. And if you guys want to see how Donald Trump is using the full force of the United States government to go after his perceived enemies, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.